As we begin this session, I want to remind you that these skills are meant to help us grow as disciples of Christ. Look at the graphic in your workbook. It shows how each skill enables us to both receive the love of God and give the love of God. In our last session, we learned the community temperature reading, or CTR for short. With that skill, I receive the love of God by using my God-given voice to express, for example, my preferences and hopes and wishes. I'm also giving the love of God by checking out puzzles and now taking responsibility for my complaints. In this session, you'll be taught two skills: stop mind reading and clarify expectations. They both revolve around eliminating more assumptions that create confusion and pain in relationships. They're simple skills and profoundly practical. These two skills are based on the 9th commandment from Exodus 20:19. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. When you and I make assumptions about others without checking them out, it's easy to start telling ourselves stories about them in our heads that aren't true. We are bearing false witness in our own thoughts against our neighbor, and this is very damaging to relationships. The first skill, called stop mind reading, is to clarify what another person is thinking rather than assuming you know. It's a skill that can be used anywhere, anytime, that I become aware that I'm making assumptions that I've not checked out.
Some Christians get offended at the title of this skill, stop mind reading, because God condemns it in the Old Testament. And that is why we call it that. We are the last people who should be involved in such a thing. For example, on my days off from church, I used to think, I'm so tired and I would love to take a nap. But in my mind, I thought to myself, if I take a nap, Jerry's going to be upset. And I just assumed it was important to her that I take advantage of every spare minute to get things done. And when I finally learned the skill, I asked her, I said, Jerry, may I have permission to read your mind?
You may.
I think that you think that if I take a nap on my day off, that I'm a slouch or I'm lazy, and you'll think less of me. Is that true?
No, not at all.
So you can see I lost years of naps.
I have an example where a young woman came to me about how she recently used this skill. She told me she assumed her friend would get mad at her for wanting to reschedule a dinner date. But this time she decided to stop mind reading and give her friend a call. So she called her and said, hey, I'd like to check out an assumption with you. I'd like to reschedule our dinner date, but I think you'll be mad at me if I do. Is that correct? Her friend said to her, no, I'm actually relieved. I've had a stressful week, and it'd be better for me too if we reschedule. So you can see how we begin to tell ourselves stories that just aren't true when we make assumptions.
The principle is simple. Never assume you know what a person is thinking or feeling. Here's how the skill works. Reflect on something you assume someone thinks or feels, but has not actually told you. And then you ask, may I have permission to read your mind? When permission is granted, you say, I think, you think. Is that correct? Or you can ask, can I check out an assumption I have? I am wondering, whatever it might be, and you say, is that correct? Here's an example of what we mean. Let me try this out now live with Jerry. Jerry, may I have permission to read your mind?
You may.
I think that you think that I'm responsible to figure out all the money involved in getting another car, and finding the car, of course. Is that correct?
No, not at all.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. May I have permission to read your mind?
Sure.
I think that you think that I am responsible for all the logistics of our summer vacation. So I'm supposed to book the flights and the rental car and the lodging. So is that correct?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Well, you know what? At least it's good to know that.
Absolutely. Now, turn in your workbooks and follow the instructions for this skill. Assumptions bring so much unnecessary pain in relationships. That's why we actually have 3 different ways of getting at our assumptions. The first was last week through the community temperature reading when we introduced puzzles. The second we just learned in Stop Mind Reading. This third one is going to be found now in Clarifying Expectations, the title of this skill. This one helps us recognize what expectations we have a right to and how to clarify our expectations with others. Listen, people quit their jobs over unmet expectations. Churches split over unmet expectations. Couples divorce over unmet expectations. Families stop talking to one another over unmet expectations. Friends do as well.
All of us grew up taking in thousands upon thousands of messages around expectations. And these messages came from our families, cultures, TV, social media, schools, friends, even fairy tales. Think for a moment just about the area of marriage. What expectations about marriage did you receive from your family? Was it wives will be in charge of the house and husbands will pay the bills? Or what did you learn from fairy tales about marriage? That you'll live happily ever after? Or how about from love songs? That romance and love comes naturally and you don't have to work at it? Holidays and birthdays also come with a ton of expectations. Here's a list of expectations that we've collected from people about Christmas. We'll buy each other gifts of equal value. Every Christmas, everyone will get along. No one will get out of hand. Every Christmas, children will be grateful and well behaved. Or guests will bring food. Or everyone will help clean up. As you think about those expectations, what do you notice? Some may be unrealistic, like everyone will get along and there will be no tension. If for the last 10 years there's tension and conflict between Uncle John and Aunt Mary, then it's probably unrealistic to expect that won't happen this year. How about buying each other's gifts of equal value? You didn't even know you had an expectation around money spent on gifts until you gave a $100 gift card and received a $5 gift. Sometimes we're unconscious of our expectations until we get disappointed. And finally, you just assumed everyone would offer to bring food without you having to ask, but they didn't. And now you're resentful because you have to cook the whole meal by yourself. So sometimes our expectations are unspoken. So there are actually 4 problems with expectations. 1, they are a problem when they are unconscious. What I mean by that is sometimes we have expectations that we didn't even know we had until we are disappointed.
So for example, I expected all of our children, we have 4 daughters, to be straight A students, until one of my daughters started getting B's and C's. I wasn't even conscious I had the expectation until it happened, and then I was disappointed.
And early in our marriage, I had no idea I expected Pete to work around our house the way my dad did when I was growing up. And when Pete wasn't fixing things on his days off, I felt annoyed and irritated, and I'm thinking to myself, isn't this his job? So sometimes, again, we're not even conscious of our expectations until we get disappointed. Second problem with expectations is when they're unrealistic. Sometimes we have expectations that aren't reasonable, or there's no evidence to support that it can or will happen. Here are some examples. My small group will end on time this week, even though it never has. Or those close to me will make my birthday special, even though they haven't in the past several years. Or someone told me recently that when they text their friend, they expect them to text them back immediately, And I said, well, what is immediately? And she said to me, 30 seconds. And I said, that's probably unrealistic. Thirdly, expectations are a problem when they are unspoken. Many times our expectations are actually never said out loud. For example, each of your colleagues will remove their food from the office refrigerator at the end of the week. Or the extended family will all help in paying for the grandparents' anniversary party. Or all leaders will attend prayer meetings. If you're telling yourself, they should just know, I want you to know this. That's probably a lie from the pit of hell. We cannot expect people to read our minds. Expectations must be spoken. And finally, expectations are a problem when they're unagreed upon. Very often, I have expectations of others that they never agreed to, or people have expectations of me I never agreed to. Just because you invited your son and his girlfriend for dinner doesn't mean they will come or have to come. Just because you asked a friend for a ride doesn't mean they will do it or have to do it. I also realized I had expectations of people they didn't agree to. I'd speak my expectations, for instance, to volunteers to be at an event 30 minutes before it was about to begin. Then I'd be shocked when they arrived 30 minutes after the event began. I later realized, although I had spoken the expectation to them by emailing the time I wanted them there, they actually had never agreed that they would come 30 minutes early. Think with me for a moment of the countless expectations around workplaces, things like overtime or coworker birthdays or who cleans out the staff refrigerator. How about home and family? Do I buy birthday presents for my brother's children? How often should I call mom or dad? Do I go to the family Christmas party since I'm expected to? Even with neighbors, there's expectations about loud music after certain hours, or barking dogs, or teenagers' friends taking food from the refrigerator without asking. And expectations around churches. The pastor will return my phone calls within 24 hours. The church will help me parent my teenage sons. I'll hang out with the people in my small group on weekends.
Here's the million-dollar question. What expectations do we have a right to, and what expectations don't we have a right to? This skill helps us to distinguish between these two things. What is a valid expectation and what is an invalid expectation? Sometimes we don't even know we have an expectation until we are angry or disappointed. That is why a lack of clarity about expectations can be like stepping on a landmine. Suddenly, you're in the midst of fallout and pain of a strained relationship.
So let's be clear about what makes an expectation valid. There are 4 criteria. Number 1, expectations must be conscious. That is, I have to be aware of my expectation. Secondly, expectations must be realistic. That means there has to be evidence to support that the expectation is reasonable of me or someone else. Either it has been done in the past, or the person has the capacity and willingness to do it. And I want to make a special note here around realistic expectations. The reason this is so important is that unrealistic expectations are a leading cause of depression. So when it comes to work projects or ministry experiences or family gatherings, you have to really think about whether your expectations are realistic or not. Thirdly, expectations have to be spoken. That means I have expressed the expectation clearly. And then finally, expectations must be agreed upon. The other person has agreed to the expectation by saying yes. So here's the principle. An expectation is only valid when mutually agreed upon. Let me repeat that. An expectation is only valid when mutually agreed upon.
Now, before we send you off to practice this skill, I want to mention a few exceptions to this agreed upon criteria. As our children's authority figure, for example, as parents, we don't need their agreement when we ask them to do the household chores. At work, where there's an employer-employee contract, there's already an overall agreement. And there is built into the marriage vow expectations that you will not flirt or be unfaithful to your spouse, that you will be faithful to them for the rest of your life. So let's now take a few minutes to do the exercise about clarifying expectations in your workbook. Follow the instructions, and when you're done, turn the video back on.
Hey, I'm late. Mom's gonna kill me.
Oh, here you go. Thanks for letting me borrow the car.
You got it.
Oh, gas light's on.
Are you kidding me? You didn't think to put gas in it before you returned it?
Well, I mean, it's your car.
I'm already 15 minutes late, and you bring me the car without gas. How about next time you think maybe put the gas in it? Common courtesy, yeah?
Hey, Nettie. So walk downstairs, go to work, and the door was unlocked this morning. So that means that when you came in last night, you were the last one to come in. You didn't lock the door.
I'm sorry. You've never expressed to me this before. This is the first time.
I shouldn't have to.
I mean, you've never said anything before about locking the door, so I just, where I grew up, we never locked our doors.
Yes, I'm always responsible.
Guys, pizza's here.
Thanks. Oh, I don't have any cash on me. Do you have cash? I can go.
I do not. You know how we trade off every other week, paying? So I didn't bring cash today. I could pay with my card, but
Okay, I
it'd
didn't.
be nice if you sort of contributed every once in a while. But no, I'll pay for it. I'll pay. I got it. Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?
Sure.
It's about our little exchange yesterday when you brought the car back without gas. I guess you could tell I was a little bit annoyed with you.
Yeah.
Well, I realized that I had an assumption that I hadn't talked to you about and that you hadn't agreed to. That if you use the car, you'll put gas back in it. So, can you agree to, whenever you use the car, to replace the gas that you used? Is that something you can agree to?
Okay. That sounds fair.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Uh-huh.
Unmet expectations are the source of deep disappointments, and wrong assumptions are the source of much preventable pain in our relationships. Learning these two skills truly has the capacity to significantly change your life. You will find that many issues are resolved by simply clarifying expectations around them. Others, however, require negotiation to solve them. This will be covered in Session 7 with the skill Fight Cleanly. Let me address 3 common questions. The first is, what do I do when someone cannot meet my expectation? So for example, you and your sister have had a mutual expectation to go on vacation together for the last 10 years. Now she's changed her mind due to a new job and a serious boyfriend. So what do? You grieve the loss and accept her decision. So now you turn your expectation into a hope. You hope someday she changes her mind and/or her life situation changes. A second question is, what do I do if I have an agreed upon expectation with someone and then they don't do it, but they agree to it? Well, perhaps they said yes because they were afraid to say no to you. Remember that if a person cannot say no to you, then what you have is not an expectation, but a demand. Maybe it wasn't clear enough. You may need to go back to clarify the issue again. Or they thought perhaps they could do it, and later they realized they couldn't do it. You will need to explore the reasons behind it. And thirdly, what do I do if God doesn't meet my expectations? Just be aware that you may have expectations of God that He never agreed to. Yes, God is good, and He is faithful, but His thoughts and plans are far different and higher than ours. Many times we have no idea what God is doing. That is why learning to spend time with Him each week through the EH Relationships Day by Day book is so essential to this course. The rhythm of meeting with God twice a day and seeking to do silence and stillness is meant to help us surrender our will and our plans to His. Each time we stop to be with Jesus, we are declaring, I need you. It is an act of humility. It's a recognition that I need Jesus' love in me if it is to flow out of me, and that I'm completely dependent on Him for supernatural help to love well. And also, before our next meeting, we want to ask you to practice the stop mind reading and clarify expectation skills 2 times. Set aside time when you can think about any assumptions or mind reading that you might be doing. And I pray that God might fill you with His power, that you might become what the book of Proverbs calls a wise, discerning person who gives thought to their ways and blesses the world as a result.